Combining AngularJS with D3.js. I'm Jon DeJong. I am the Chief Software Technologist at Object Partners. Real quick, Object Partners is a consulting firm that's headquartered in Minneapolis. We also have offices in Omaha and people in a few other cities. I have about 100 consultants. We're historically a JVM shop, but that's expanding as the concept of web apps expand. My name again is Jon DeJong. I've been doing this for about 15 years. Like I said, mostly on the JVM. In the last couple of years, I've become a huge fan of AngularJS. I think part of that is those two kind of go together. One of the things I really like about AngularJS, show hands, people that have at least looked at AngularJS. Okay. Oh wow, awesome. Is that it's very it kind of enforces some of the stuff that we do on the back end by its dogmatic nature of mostly separation of concerns. And as everybody here knows already, the browser is the world's most deployed VM. I like to say that when I'm talking about JavaScript, in that JavaScript runs everywhere, and we're moving our web apps down to the browser. I'm speaking to the choir here. So what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to go a little bit into what is D3, and then show hands, people who have used D3. Okay, so didn't know what everybody's background would be on D3 or Angular. People wanted to know more about one or the other, or strictly about combining them. So I'll do a quick intro into what is D3 and what we use it for. And I'll give a quick intro into a structure on Angular. As you guys probably know, Angular could be a 3-day workshop, and you still wouldn't know everything about it, so it's going to be really quick. And then I'll look at some stuff that we've done combining the two and using D3's graphing capabilities inside of an AngularJS app. I have 4 ways of doing it. One I call the brute force way, which is just literally just combining the 2 libraries. And one, the roll your own directive, will build a custom directive in Angular that will build a D3 chart. Reusable directives, and then NVD3 is a library that is out there that basically masks a lot of D3 is really cool for manipulating the SVG graphics, but 90% of what we use it for in our enterprise jobs is we're building charts, right? We're building bar graphs, pie charts, whatever, to model some data for our clients or for our company. NVD3 wraps a lot of that into libraries, or instead of actually drawing all the SVG, you create a bar chart object or a pie chart object or whatever. So we'll end with a sample project that is built on top of NVD3. Real quick, I call this my code blast. I grabbed code from a lot of different places. I've thrown it up in my GitHub repo. This is what we're going to look at today. So all this is a little bit different. The slides is obviously my slides. So if you want my slides, they're there. I have a simple example, but I'm going to look at it. It's just a real simple intro to D3 example. I have a charts demo, which is actually a Grails app. We'll look at that spins up an Angular app inside of Grails that has a bunch of different charts in it, and we'll look through how that works. And then I have this states called the states demo. It's a app that runs on top. It has a Grails backend running on top of MongoDB with a full Angular front end using the UI router and Angular to control the different states of a chart using NVD3. So we'll look at code for all that. So all that's there if you want to play with it. There's way more code in it than I'm going to have time to get through today, but there's a lot of hopefully good examples in there. So what is D3? This is a really quick description of D3. D3 stands for data-driven documents. It uses what I call imperative data binding. This is in contrast to Angular. Angular and D3 are both based off the idea of binding data to your DOM and manipulating your DOM by manipulating your data, but they do it completely differently. So D3 is imperative. We use DOM manipulations, much like you would see in the jQuery app. We're going to do some selections, and it has this concept of joins, which we'll get into in a second. But the important thing is that we're programmatically and imperatively manipulating our DOM with jQuery. I'll also provide some nice utilities. Generators and layouts. Generators are like, here's my data, and I want you to generate something that I can draw with it, so that I don't want to do all the math to figure out what a pie chart should look like. It'll have a generator. You can use generators and layouts to generate new data based off your data and then apply that into a layout to lay it out the way you want to. And the last bullet point's SVG. It's like Christina talked about. D3 manipulates your DOM. It doesn't have to be inside of an SVG object. You can draw divs, you can draw tables, you can do whatever you want to, but it's really powerful and usually used inside of an SVG tag. So start with selections. This is using D3 to select some part of the DOM. This should look familiar to everybody. This is your standard CSS selectors. Familiar if you use jQuery or anything else. First one, we're just going to grab the body. The second one, we're grabbing a collection of all the paragraphs. And then the last one is we're grabbing the nav. We can manipulate the DOM that way. So we take, in this case, we are setting the content to a width of 500. The second one is we're passing in a function to calculate the width based on our data. So this is after we bound our data to our document, or bound our data to this, we are saying whatever D is, make my width double that, and we'll show you in a second where that's useful. Back up and talk a little bit about data joins. So when you're working in D3, when you select something, you get 3 sets of those objects. You get the interlock, interjoin, update join, and the exit join. And when you start, you're going to grab something, and typically you grab an empty selection, and then you bind some data to it, and that puts a whole bunch of stuff in your interblock. This is the stuff that hasn't been drawn yet, and it's bound to your data. When you refresh, everything that's there, or the data's changed, is in your update block. Everything that is there but no longer has a data bound to it is in your exit block. So you can control all those blocks separately. So maybe I've added data to my data set. It's now in my enter block, and I'll tell D3 to make some sort of nice transition. Same thing with the exit block. Maybe I'll make a nice transition, and then I'll remove the DOM element. This is how we select things. I highly recommend this link right here. If you kind of explains how to think, and it's literally called Thinking in Joins. By Mike Bostock, and it's a nice Bostock, and it is a nice sort of in-depth explanation that helps you kind of work through that. So here's some joins. So I've created a data array. I just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm selecting all of the data content fields, everything with the class of dot content, and I am appending my data to that. So I'm binding my data to that collection. So now I have a whole bunch. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items in my interjoin. For each one of those, I want to create a div, and I'm going to assign it a class of content. So what I'm assuming right now is I don't have anything. I'm starting with nothing on the DOM. I'm getting an empty enter array. For each one of those, I'm appending something called content, and then I'm returning 2 times D. So in this case, it's going to create 5 divs, which are going to have a width of 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. If there is any in there that no longer is in there, then I can use my exit block to remove that DOM element. So that's real quick binding data to something, adding it to the DOM, and removing something from the DOM if it was there before. So another example, the creating circles example is all over the docs. I'm selecting all my circles. Again, when I'm starting this, I'm probably expecting that returns an empty set. I'm binding some data to it. And for each thing in my enter block now, I'm appending a circle. So I'm creating a circle on my DOM. The center X is just my data. I'm assuming that my data has an X element and a Y element. So I'm setting my center X and center Y and a radius of 2.5. So for what I'm assuming here is that my data set that gets passed in is going to have an X element and a Y element, and I'm drawing a circle inside of an SVG block that is at that X and that Y, and they'll all be the same size. They'll have a radius of 2.5. Real quick, I briefly mentioned generators and layouts. So you can there's utility methods inside of D3 to create these generators to create things from data, to help you create lines, arcs, areas, chords, diagonals. I'll show you more. And the same thing with layouts. We're not going to get too in-depth with these, but I do have some examples if you want to look at them. So you can combine, for example, the art generator with a pie layout to draw a pie chart. So those are some of the utility methods that D3 kind of gives you to help you build these things. So, okay, what is AngularJS? AngularJS is a JavaScript framework. A huge show of hands said that most of you know what this is, so I kind of glossed over this, but I call it MVC in the browser. I know that we can argue over the semantics of the terms for that, but basically the important part of that to me is that it's a framework for separating your concerns, and it's really about isolating units of work into controller services, directives, whatever, into these modules that you can reuse to build your app. Declarative data binding, again, that's in stark contrast to D3, which is a very imperative data binding model. And what I mean by that is in Angular, I'm going to tell the DOM, right in the HTML, this data is bound to this idea or whatever. And you're not doing selections, you're not doing it in code like you are in jQuery or in D3. Angular is also very dogmatic. This can be either good or bad. I always put this up when I'm talking about Angular because it's very much, Angular is really awesome if you do everything the way it's supposed to be done, but with something like D3, where you're going to try to combine the two and they take completely different approaches, it can be complex. Angular doesn't like that. Some of the components that we're going to talk about in Angular that we're going to use today, we have controllers, which are just units of code that wrap around a view to control what's in the view. We have a view, which is really just HTML. And then it provides a way for us to create services to facilitate communication between our controllers. And we're going to look at directives. And a directive is just basically, you can think about it as a new element type in HTML. There's a lot more Angular than this, but these are the things that we're going to use today. So, real quick example. This is my little hello world controller. And I'm taking $scope. The $scope is a variable that is exposed to your HTML in Angular. So I have $scope. I'm setting a message on it called hello world. And then I can use the handlebar notations to reference that inside of my HTML. So what you see is an H2 that says you said hello world. That's basically a controller controlling some HTML and Angular at a really high level. If I want to use a service here, I'm using the Angular module, the service method to create a new service called myService. A service is a singleton that lives inside of your app. I'm returning what you return is what you have access to external to the service. So I am returning this object that has a field on it called message, which says hello world. And my controller is injecting the my service that kind of got cut off right at the end. I'm injecting my service into my controller. And that gives my controller access to that service. So I'm setting scope.message to the my service.message. I'm not doing anything different here. The end result is going to be the same, but what I'm doing is I'm offloading that data access to a service. One of the things we're going to look at is the HTTP service. Angular has many provided services. There's many modules you can come with it or that you can grab and use with your app. Obviously, the most used one is probably $HTTP, which wraps your AJAX calls. Excuse me. So, in this service, what we're doing is we have a private variable called data, and we have a method that we're exposing called fetchThings. And fetchThings calls HTTP has a get, post, put, delete methods on it like you would expect. And we're hitting our Rust endpoint, and that returns a function. That returns a promise. So at our .then, we are passing in when this promise gets resolved. This is what I want to execute, and I'm setting the data to the data block in the response that I get back. So that's some quick Rust handling using the $HTTP service inside of Angular. Totally didn't give Angular justice. That was not a good description of what Angular is really, but it's enough to get us going for what we want to talk about today. So what challenges do we have? So I may have mentioned this before. We're looking at imperative versus declarative data bindings, which is fundamentally different. So we're going to try to hide that as much as we can. D3 looks messy in what I would call idiomatic Angular code. You don't want that event-driven. You don't want that imperative sort of direct dominant manipulation inside of Angular code. Angular doesn't like that. If you're an Angular developer, you try to avoid that. It also makes testing really hard to directly be manipulating the DOM. So we really want to do is isolate that as much as possible. So the first method I'm going to talk about is the brute force method. And that's just combining the two libraries and going with it. So I have an app that should be open on it. It is. This is the charts demo that I briefly pointed out, and we'll look at the code for that. But real quick, what this does, so the monitor resolution's not too great here, but this is actually an app that I built for a demo on D3 at GridConf last year, so it runs in Ruby. But we have a bar chart. We have a bunch of charts, but real simply, we have a bar chart. We'll look at the code for the bar chart in depth here, and we'll play with that. But basically, we have some data bound to this. We can change our chart. This app also has what I call a transitional bar chart that shows some transitions. So it kind of delays and transitions nicely using D3's transitions. We have a dynamic bar chart that we can add data to. Looks better if it's laid out correctly on a full resolution monitor, but we just added something new. Skip ahead a little bit. We have our pie chart. Same thing. Redraws itself as the data changes, and we have a dynamic pie chart that, let's say we want to see what makes up module D as a value of 33. Why is that? If we click on that, we redraw our pie chart. All this code is out there, and we'll look at some of it. But these are just some examples of some demo charts that I built using D3 with Angular. So the brute force method, why would you want to do this way? Why would you want to just combine the two? Well, if you want complete granular control over exactly what everything looks like and how it behaves and how you interact with it, you're probably not going to want to use a reusable library because some of that stuff will be taken away from you for the sake of making it simpler. This is my HTML for my container that controls. This is for the bar chart that we looked at. So now I have some JavaScript that's going to create the chart. This is all straight D3. So I'm creating the chart by selecting the container, and I'm appending an SVG element inside of the container. And I'm setting some attributes. So it's going to be 420 pixels wide, and 26 is sort of just the magic number I came up with for the size of the bars. So it's going to be 26 times however many pieces of data we have. Data count is a variable that's living in scope there. This levels is just a helper method to pull some data out of our modules is our data that we're graphing, and levels is just a helper function to pull some data out of there. This D3 scale linear is giving me a scale to it's giving me a scale in between 0 and the max of my levels mapped to 0 and 420. So basically that's saying if my highest level is 10 and you're 5, then map at 210. So it's basically mapping those fields, so it's preventing me from having to do the math on how wide to actually make these rectangles. Then we're going to use these selections to append these recs to our chart. So we grab our chart and we do a select all rec, which is empty. We pass in however many modules we have, and then we tell it to calculate the width by scaling on our value that we have. And then in our interblock, we're going to draw new rectangles. And we have our y value, which is just I times it. So this function di, everything you get calculated with the function di and d3. So d is your data, whatever you pass in an array of objects. The d is that instance, and I is that index. So in this case, we're stacking our charts, or stacking our bars. So we're setting a y value of I times however tall we want, the index times however tall we want, bar B. And we're setting the width is that scale of that level. Then it's going to be 20 pixels high, so we're going to have a 6 pixel gap in the middle. And here's the same thing, but we're creating text elements to do the labels. So we're selecting everything that has selecting all the text elements, binding the modules to the data there, and creating D has the name of the module, and so we're saying D : space level name. And we're positioning the same idea, some basic X, Y math to position them. So that gives us a div with the width that corresponds to the level and our name and our text for our name. So this is a shortened version of what we're doing. Each one of these is an Angular route, so we're using the Angular router to tell us where to go, tell us what to load. So this is a quick snippet of that. It's only covering the top two, but we're telling you what template to load and which controller to use. So that bar chart is getting managed by the bar chart controller. And all the bar chart controller is doing is it's getting the modules from somewhere, and it's calling create chart, and then it's, which is the function we just looked at. The function we just looked at is actually refresh chart. Create chart sets up the chart variables, and then we're setting a watcher on modules and refreshing the chart. So every time we change the module, Angular is watching it, and our refresh chart method gets called, which is all that JavaScript code you just saw. So we want to look at that in IntelliJ. It's kind of hard to get, actually. I'm guessing that on a low resolution monitor, this probably looks a little better. It looks exactly the same. Okay. So this is like I said, it's a Grails app. So all the views are in GSPs, which are basically, they're all just straight HTML. This is what we just looked at. We have our little header, and then we have that HTML container that I showed you. All of our source lives down here. That really looks terrible on that monitor, doesn't it? Okay. So we're creating our app. This is straight Angular. We're creating our app. We're defining all of our routes. And our bar chart controller is what we just looked at. So that's wrapped around their HTML. So this is, again, what I call the brute force method. Because it's really just grabbing our data, putting it in scope, and offloading everything to some JavaScript that handles the D3 calls. And those live, in this, so there's the JavaScript we just looked at, but it's in this refresh bar chart method. Pretty much copy and pasted everything into the set. So that's that app. Any questions about what I call the brute force method? I don't like that. I don't like that for several reasons. It's kind of ugly code. It's not testable. If you've got all of this code all of this D3 code living in your Angular controllers, then you've lost your ability to unit test those using the Jasmine and Karma tools that you've heard so much about at this conference. We really want to isolate that. We want our controllers to just manipulate data, same with our services. So the next idea is a custom directive. This is probably the best way if you have to do a lot of custom stuff. And hide all the D3 stuff yourself. So why would you do that? It's idiomatic Angular. This would be the Angular way to do this. It's reusable. You can take those directives and reuse them, so you can create your own bar chart or pie chart directive and use that across multiple projects or across multiple places within the same project. And it's isolating the D3 code to the directive that's using it, allowing your controllers and your controller to not have to worry about the imperative DOM binding, which enables easier testing. So in Angular, you can create a directive. Up at the top here, I am creating a directive called hello inside of my custom D app. I'm restricting it to B. That means it's an element. You can have elements or attributes. And you get this link method, passes in scope to element attributes, and all I'm doing is I'm setting the element's text to hello world. Here's some HTML using my new hello tag that I just created. And the output is the text inside of that becomes hello world. And we're using the Bootstrap Jumbotron class, so this is what your output looks like. Pretty straightforward. We just created our own tag. That tag's kind of useless. Let's create a bar chart tag. So we're going to create the same bar chart, but we're going to do it in a custom element or in a custom directive. So now I'm creating a new directive called bar chart, and I have this scope data colon equals thing. What does that mean? When I'm passing in things on using attributes for my directive, and in this case, I want to pass in the data that I got bound in scope. By default, everything's going to pass in as a string. I don't want that. I want Angular to know that this is going to be an object. So this is going to tell this to bind this as an object, so we can access it as a JavaScript object inside of our link method. So after that, I'm doing basically the same thing. This is actually CoffeeScript code. So if it looks a little weird, it's CoffeeScript code. I kind of started switching that. It works a little bit on the slides because there's just less stuff to copy and paste. But it's syntactic sugar over JavaScript. What I'm doing here is I have the same scale function. I have a color function. This is another little utility stuff that comes with Angular. It's basically saying take 20 colors that somebody more designy than me decided looks good together, and we can pass an index value to pick one of those 20 colors. And then I'm setting up the attributes for my chart. Again, I'm basically taking that D3 code and I'm pasting it into a directive here. So we create our inter block, select our rectangles, we go into the inter block, and we set up the same X and Y, and we change the color though, they're now going to be green. We're picking in the color from that color index. Same thing with the labels that we saw before, same XY math, just in CoffeeScript now. Now all our controller is caring about, this is the important part, is all our controller cares about now is the data. All it cares about is binding the data to scope. So it's saying $scope.data equals these values. These are different values that we looked at before, but the chart will be pretty much the same. So you have day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, or we have different value measurements in day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. This is testable, obviously, in a real enterprise app. You're not going to be hard coding data into your controller. What we've done is we've removed this external JavaScript code out of the controller. So this is isolated, it does its work, it's testable, and that's all that it cares about is just getting this data and putting what it needs to on scope. To use our new bar chart tag, we have a bar chart, we pass in the ID, and we are passing in data.values as our data, and our output is this pretty chart. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. We're going to go back to, I'm passing in that ID here, so when I'm doing the select, you'll notice in my HTML here, I don't have anything with that ID. There's nothing inside, there's nothing here that says this is where the chart goes. It's going where the bar chart element is. I'm selecting it right here and appending an SVG element to it. So that's even though I'm selecting something, in D3 you can select things that don't exist, right? So I'm selecting the thing that doesn't exist, and I'm appending one SVG element onto that. So now I have one thing with that ID, and it's an SVG element. So that is appending that inside of my tag. So you see that running. Here's all of that code that we just walked through. This is a Yeoman Angular app. It's just a quick Angular. Everybody know what Yeoman is? Yeoman is just a generator. Yo Angular custom directive created this app for me. Yo Angular directive created this directive file for me, and I put all this code in here that gave me the directive. This is the controller that we just looked at. And all my HTML, and we also have the hello world directive that we look at. It's very, very exciting stuff right there. The app.coffee just has a basic setting up the one route that we're going to use to go to the one page we're going to look at, and our HTML that uses both of our custom directives. Has a header. It uses our hello directive, and it uses our bar chart directive. So we can serve that up with a prompt task. Our two custom directives, just like we saw on the slides. These are not interactive at all yet, but that's a quick and dirty way to write a custom directive that interacts with Angular, or interacts with D3, yes.
So I know it's not interactive, but that may get changed somehow.
Yes, it would. We'll look into that in the next one. There's some tricks to, I don't actually know if this one would or not, because we're not explicitly watching the data. So I'd have to test that to answer you for sure, but it is something that you can do easily.
Because you have the equals finding.
Oh, okay, yeah, good point, thank you. Yes. I didn't want to say that for sure because I hadn't tested it. So then, that's the custom directive. The next one is just sort of a quick slide. There's a lot of these. Search GitHub, use Google. If you're looking for a directive to do something, someone may have already, most likely has already done it. So search GitHub, search Google. You can find a lot of these. Before we move on, I just want to mention that you don't always have to roll your own. And we will quickly find NVD3. So I talked about this at the start, and this is what we're going to kind of delve into here. Is NVD3 is a charting library that has bar charts, pie charts, stacked bar charts, pretty much all the different types of charts that you would want to use. It doesn't allow you to do all the fancy custom SVG stuff. If you're going to do something outside of the standard chart, you're going to have to do it on your own. But this is going to help you lab if you're just building an app that your client says, can you put a bar chart in there that shows me this data? This is going to help you lab. It's maintained by Novus Partners. It's open source. Novus Partners is they do a lot of financial software, so they use that for their custom financial reporting stuff. An NVD bar chart looks like this. So instead of doing all of that SVG stuff that we talked about, we're creating a new discrete bar chart. We're telling it what X and Y are, and we're telling it we want to look at the values. We're selecting a new SVG chart, binding the data, and that's pretty much it. That will give you a really simple bar chart in NVD3. I don't have any examples of using this by itself. We're going to use it with some directives, but this is just here to show you how much simpler this is than actually doing all the D3 coding yourself. I like this library. It was written by Christian Mahler. It's called AngularJS and VD3 directives. And basically what he's done is he's taken all these charts that NVD3 provides for you and has created custom Angular directives that you can just wire right into your Angular app to quickly on the fly build interactive charts. And so that's the end of my slides. What I'm going to go into is a bigger app it's an Angular app that's wrapped around these directives. So we'll get that spun up. What we have on the background here is we have a Mongo data instance that stores some data. And spin up the back end. So we have a REST, the Gluons app is just going to spit out REST for us so we can have some REST data to get into. And we have a front end app. That is just a pure Angular app that we can spin up with code. So this is our app. This is it started as sort of a fitness tracker. I had to try to come up with something. This is an interactive bar chart. This shows someone's workout logs by the year 2010, 2011, 12, et cetera, et cetera. And apparently the data was randomized, and so my random person apparently likes to bike a lot more than they like to run. But we have tooltips, and we have a legend, so we can say we don't actually care about the total. We don't care about the bike. This is how much they've run each year. I'm calling this the stateful bar chart, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. But this is interactive. I click on a particular year. Should be. I click on a year, and it's going to go in and load that year. I click on a month, it's going to go in and load that month. Sometimes. Okay, you guys all saw it load the year, right? So now we have each week inside of that month, and here we have each day inside of that week. I call this stateful because you'll notice that the URL is changing. So I can copy this, then kill Chrome, reopen Chrome, because I just emailed it to a colleague, and the colleague can go in and go directly to this chart. So I'm keeping track of what state my interactive chart is in the URL using the Angular UI router. So we'll look at that. I have a stateless one. This one is a little more interactive, so I'm not keeping track of that state in the URL, but I have some nice little buttons here, and I get fancier transitions. So you'll notice that this one has nice little transitions that are very pretty. Okay, they're not very pretty, but you can get creative and make them prettier yourself. Whereas my stateful one, well, I get the benefit of the URL changing. I'm actually redrawing the chart. It's still a single page app, but I am actually loading a new chart based on what I have in my URL pattern. And then this last tab here has nothing to do with the rest of the app, but it's a quick way of showing and actually modifying the data. So I'm going to add, I have a stacked bar chart that has some things and some other things, although it's reusing the same tooltip, so it says it's miles, but whatever. So if I want to add 5 things and 3 others and hit save, I can create on the fly a new piece of data there. So on the back end, you can do that what you want to. You can post that to the server. You can just manipulate the chart inside of your web app, whatever you need to do. So I want to just walk through the code on how this works slides that we have here. So guys, at this point, if you have any questions on this, just yell it out, because I'm pretty much just going to walk through the code and show how that works. So there's a lot of Angular code and some tie into NVD3 in here. So we're using the state provider, which is the Angular UI router. This replaces the ng router that you probably normally use with Angular. The state provider is really nice because it allows me to nest my states. So if I'm looking at that first state, I want /bar. My first state is bar. I never actually go directly to that state. If you look at the URL here, what state I'm loading is bar all. So this is showing all of my data in a bar chart. So what happens when Angular loads is I go here, and I'm going to slash, and it says, I don't know what slash is, but I'm going to send you here. So we'll start with that. I have this, I'm telling my URL provider that if you don't match anything you see below, then send the user to the state of bar all. So what Angular does here is bar all depends upon the bar state. So first it loads the bar state and it pulls in the main.html template, which is controlled by the main controller, and then it pulls in the bar chart template, which is controlled by the bar all chart controller. So we'll go main.html. This wraps everything that we. So this is our header that we saw to switch between which type of chart we're looking at. This is controlling those buttons that say 2012, May, or whatever. What the state provider is essentially doing is it's looking for this UI view. So it says, okay, you're going to /bar/all. So I'm going to find /bar, which is this, and it's going to load this, and it's going to wrap it in the controller we told it to wrap in. And then it's going to say, and you have another state that you're looking for. You're looking for the bar state underneath this. So I'm going to look for this UI view tag, and I'm going to fill that in with the next state. So it has to blow up the font size huge every time I change files. In that case, it says, okay, well, this next state is defined here. It's bar all, so I'm going to put in barchart.html, and I'm going to wrap that with my bar chart service. And this is all we do to define the chart in NVD3. I'm using the NVD3 multi-bar chart tag. This is the custom directive that they've written for us. My data is data. I'm giving it an ID of a misspelled stateful. That's awesome. I'm giving it width and height. And the rest of these are pretty much just flags that you can set. So I'm going to width and height. I want to see the x-axis. I want to see the legend. I want to see the y-axis. The delay, it's 1200 millisecond delay while it loads. I want to see tooltips. I'm passing the tooltip content as a function that gets called back. And I'm passing in this callback function, which we'll get to in a second. I want to rotate the label 65 degrees, and then I set my margins. And that's it.
So that directive, is that part of that?
Yes, that's part of that library. So that gives you a whole bunch of these that wrap around bar charts, pie charts, different types of bar charts. So we'll take a look at our controllers next. This is for our parent state, or this is basically controlling our navigation. It's got a bunch of stuff in scope tied to these buttons to change our states that we're going to look at. And this is our tooltip function. So we can pass in a custom tooltip function to take in, we get the key and the XY and the XY values. So that's where we get the key, water bike, Y miles in X. So that shows us I biked 27 miles in May or whatever. Otherwise, most of this controller is just controlling where we're at, so that based on what state we're in, it turns various buttons on and off. for us. This is our controller. It's very simple. So our controller is grabbing the data that gets passed into it. We'll look at how that happens in a second. This is all of our data getting passed in, and then we have this callback function. So NVD3 creates these charts for you, and it doesn't give you a whole lot of customization. One thing it does give you is the ability to pass in a callback function, and the callback function returns a function that allows you to process the chart afterwards. So this is how I'm clicking on each rectangle to dive into that year or month or whatever. In this case, I'm going to dive into a year because I'm in my controller that's displaying all of my data. And so what I'm saying is attach a click handler to everything that has the class NVBar, which is those bar charts. And when someone clicks on it, I get access to the data assigned to that, the D object that's assigned to that. So D sub 0 is my year. So I'm telling the state to go to the state of bar.year with this parameter. That's all that is. How do I get my data? One thing I haven't talked about yet is where in the world is my data coming from? I pull up Postman here. No, that's right. It's not adjustable. I don't need Postman. Let's just do host 8080 slash. This is my REST service that we have running as a Grills app in the background. This is the data that I'm actually fetching out of MongoDB. This is for all of my data, so I get a list of years with the byte total, the run total, and the overall total. If I want to say get 2011, now I get everything for 2011. This is the backend data service that we're hitting. How does that get into our controller here? Well, we're using barchart.coffee is our bar chart service. So we create this service using our $HTTP that we demoed earlier in the charts, or in the slides. So this has get day totals, get week totals, get month totals, and get year totals. The get year totals just gets that collection of years that we saw. So that's what we're calling is this get year totals method under the hood. It's hitting that URL that we just saw, and it's getting that response back, and it's basically just looping through the data that we get back and building up a map the way that it looks nice for the NVD3 chart. So we're creating an array of objects, the total, the byte total, and the run total. Each object has a key, and each object has a set of values. And each instance in our values array has the year and the total. So we have two, it's an array of tuples essentially. Excuse me. If we look at app.copy, when we route to this, we're setting this resolve. And what this resolve block allows us to do is it says that we're defining that data that's getting passed in, and we're saying data is bound to this promise. So this bar chart service, get year totals, returns a promise that says that I will eventually return with this data for you. And when that does return, it resolves data to whatever that returns for us, and then binds that back into the data, it binds it back into the controller that gets passed in. So when our state provider comes in and says, okay, I'm going to go to this controller, bar chart controller, and I'm expecting a parameter to be in there called data, and I'm going to pass whatever this promise eventually resolves to into that group. And that's how we're getting the data sent into the controller. Does that make sense? What that allows us to do is that allows us to keep track of where we are in the URL. also, since I'm using the word testing quite a bit, by using the state provider, we have removed that dependency. The controller is no longer dependent upon the service, making it that much easier to test. We don't have to mock out that service call. We don't have to mock out that HTTP call. We can just call that. We can just test that it translates that data correctly, however it needs to. If we look at what happens when I click on a particular year, I'm going to the year state and I'm passing in a year parameter, and that allows me, gives me the state parameters object that has a year on it. So when I'm passing that into get month totals on the bar chart service, I don't understand why it has to change my font every time. That's where I'm getting that year object, and I'm appending that to the URL to get my REST response back. So pretty simple app there. I'm running out of time here, so I'll try to speed up a little bit. As for the stateless one, so I kind of cheated on the stateless one. Some of you may have noticed that these aren't interactive now. I got rid of that callback. And the reason is, I move these off to these little buttons. It gives me two things. One is, this gives us a new layout. It's a little more complicated screen. I have something getting controlled over here while something else is getting controlled over here, which gives you some more example code. But also, once I click on this and my data set changes, my callback isn't getting re-executed. It only got executed the first time, so I would have lost all those click handlers. I'm not sure the way around that, so if anybody's looking for it to figure that out, that would be awesome. But I didn't immediately see a way around that, so I moved my buttons over here. And basically, what are we doing here? This is my stateless controller. I've moved, excuse me. All of these buttons are no longer being controlled by the header because we're not wired back, we're not changing states. So I have separate methods to control those. And then I just have this transition object that changes my data set for me. So I click on year, I say show year stateless, and I tell the bar chart service to go give me the month totals, passing in the year that I got. That again is a promise. When the promise resolves, the then gets called, and I set selections data to this data, which the set selections method controls these things, the things that I can select. And otherwise, all I'm doing is I'm wiring scope.data to my new data. That data was bound to the bar chart in the tag library, and the element tag. So when that changes, it's automatically redrawing the chart for me. Take a look at that real quick. I feel like I give a really quick explanation of that. It's really the same thing. So when this changes, it's redrawing the chart. And again, I can't, that had to be a copy paste there. I couldn't have misspelled state twice. Right? Come on, let's hope. And the last one I want to look at is this updating chart. There's one difference here is we're passing in this flag object equality. What I'm doing here is instead of just all out replacing, and the last one we saw was that data object replaced. Inside of the controller, I said I'm replacing this data object with this other data object, and then told the chart to go. The chart was watching that data object, it saw that it changed, and so it redrew the chart. In this case, I'm not updating the entire data object, I'm updating the data inside of the object. I'm adding a new element to that array. So I have to tell it to look for object equality. Instead of just looking for the value equality, I want to look for the object equality. I've that is, by default, Angular doesn't do that because it's expensive. Because it actually has to check every child property of every child inside of that data array. But by telling it this, it's actually going to loop down through and look at every property on that array. So when I add a new element to the array, this redraws. If this was commented out, actually this was commented out, it wouldn't even compile. Okay. If that was commented out like that, it moved. This no longer works. Because even though we are changing the data in the controller, we're not changing the parent object, we're not swapping out the parent object, so we told Angular we don't care about that, so it's not watching that for us. So that's something to look out for. If you saw Will's talk beforehand, that's what he meant by the paying attention between watching values and watching references. Otherwise, the controller is fairly simple. The same basic code I went before. A minute. I think that was the right file. This is we're starting with some hard-coded data. We're not pulling this from our Mongo instance from our REST service. We're setting scopes. Scope.new, this is our new thing. It starts with zeros. We have things and we have others. And then when I click add new, I am pushing that onto the scope.data row. I have two arrays, one for things and one for others, and I'm pushing the new object on there, and then I'm zeroing back out the input box. And that's all there is to that. And I think we're pretty much out of time. Does anybody have any questions? Just really big clap. All right, I'll go ahead and thank you.